This is BBC World News. I'm James Reynolds. Our top stories. Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab accuses the Chinese government of carrying out human rights abuses against its minority Uyghur population.
It is deeply, deeply troubling, and the reports and the human aspect of it, from forced sterilisation to the education camps, are reminiscent of something we have not seen for a long, long time.
Meanwhile, China's ambassador to the UK tells the BBC that Britain's decision to drop Huawei from its 5G network is a bad move. President Trump mistakenly claims that the US has one of the lowest death rates from coronavirus in the world. And the first Arab space mission to Mars is preparing for liftoff. Hello and welcome to BBC World News. China's ambassador to the UK has denied reports that China's carrying out a program of sterilisation of Uyghur women in the western part of the country, Xinjiang. Reports and eyewitness accounts have accused China of trying to reduce the Uyghur population by forced sterilisation. The Uyghur Muslims are the largest ethnic group in China's far west Xinjiang region. China denies human rights abuses there, but there is evidence of mosques being destroyed, as you can see in these before and after pictures. Uyghurs say they are subject to intense state surveillance. Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said that there were gross and egregious human rights abuses going on and that he found that troubling. It comes amid a rise in diplomatic tension between the two countries over a new national security law in Hong Kong and over the British government's decision to ban the Chinese company Huawei from the UK's 5G network. Our diplomatic correspondent Caroline Hawley has the story.
It's never been an easy relationship, but now troubles are mounting on multiple fronts. There's deep concern for the future of Hong Kong after China imposed new security laws on the former British colony, undermining its autonomy. The government is now preparing to escalate its response.
I said we would conduct a review of our extradition arrangements and also a range of other measures that we might wish to take. I've now, with the Home Secretary and the rest of government, concluded that review. I will update the House of Commons on what further measures we're taking tomorrow.
Today, China warned Britain not to follow the US in imposing sanctions.
If UK government goes that far to impose sanctions on any individuals in China, China will certainly make resolute response to it.
China reacted with fury to Britain's decision to ban Huawei's technology because of security concerns. There are fears now of the potential economic fallout for British business. Other countries, including the US, Japan and Australia, have paid a price for falling out with China.
China has sanctioned commerce, trade, the companies of those countries operating in China. So, to be honest, I mean, it's difficult to predict what China might do with regard to the United Kingdom, but we might have to expect that British companies would be in the crosshairs.
What China is doing to its Uyghur minority has caused international outrage. Men have been forced into mass re-education camps, women forcibly sterilised. Dominic Raab today said the human rights abuses being committed were egregious and deeply, deeply troubling. The ambassador was shown video that appears to show bound, blindfolded men being forced onto a train. This was his response.
Uyghur people enjoy harmonious life, peaceful, harmonious coexistence with other ethnic groups of people. You know, Uyghur people is just one small portion of the Chinese population, even among the Muslims, but they living, majority of them living happily and peacefully, harmoniously.
The British government says it can't stand by and watch abuses take place, but it also wants a good relationship with China and with the US at the same time. An almost impossible balancing act. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
For the first time since the coronavirus pandemic began, the number of new daily infections around the world has surpassed 250,000. The biggest increases have been in the US, Brazil, India and South Africa. Brazil remains one of the worst affected countries, with the number of cases in that country passing 2 million. More than 78,000 people have died in Brazil with the virus. Numbers are rising. Of the 600,000 people who've caught the virus and lost their lives around the world, nearly a quarter have been in the United States. The country still has by far the biggest outbreak of COVID-19. It does not yet appear to be close to reaching a peak. And the death toll in India now stands at 26,816. Here's our reporter, Paul Hawkins.
According to the World Health Organization, this is the first time the number of new daily infections has surpassed 250,000. The biggest increases are in South Africa, India, Brazil and the USA, where there are now approximately 71,000 new cases per day. 41 states out of 50 are seeing an increase, but the biggest rises are in southern and western states, like here in California, also Arizona, Texas and Florida, which a few days ago reported more new cases in one 24-hour period than the entire European Union. Many experts say lockdown was lifted too quickly, and the messaging on masks has been mixed, with President Trump wearing one, but not insisting his fellow Americans have to wear one too, which directly contradicts his top infectious diseases expert.
I would urge the leaders, the local political and other leaders in states and cities and towns, to be as forceful as possible in getting your citizenry to wear masks.
Brazil has approximately 45,000 new cases a day. Total infections, like the US, are over 2 million, a figure it reached in less than a month after taking 4 months to reach 1 million. But there is some good news.
There is a plateau. There is an opportunity here now for Brazil to push the disease down, to suppress the transmission of the virus, to take control.
India has approximately 35,000 new cases per day, but scientists say the peak could still be months away, although the fatality rate is relatively low. South Africa has 13,000 new cases per day. It's gripped the country, overwhelming hospitals, and that's why all South Africans have to wear masks, with the president saying this last weekend.
The sale, the dispensing and the distribution of alcohol will be suspended with immediate effect. A curfew will be put in place.
And so without a vaccine, the numbers keep climbing. The death toll keeps rising and the world tries to adapt. Paul Hawkins, BBC News.
The number of people in the United States who've died with COVID-19 has passed 140,000. That's almost a quarter of the global total. But President Trump has dismissed evidence from Johns Hopkins University that the US has the world's 7th highest mortality rate from the disease. In an interview with Fox News, the president insisted that his country did have one of the lowest rates.
When you talk about mortality rates, I think it's the opposite. I think we have one of the lowest mortality rates in the world. We're going to take a look.
We had 900 deaths on a single day.
We will take a look.
This week.
Ready?
You can check it out.
Could you please get me the mortality rate?
Yeah.
Kaylee's right here. I heard we had one of the lowest, maybe the lowest mortality rate anywhere in the world. Do you have the numbers, please? Because I heard we had the best mortality rate.
The case rate of similarly situated countries, as Dr. Burks points out, and this is
number one low mortality rate.
For some analysis on the claims being made by President Trump, here's our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes.
He is still saying that the virus will eventually disappear, and let's hope for everyone's sake he is eventually proved to be right on that point. But what he is continuing to say is that the number of cases which we're seeing increase dramatically in certain states around the country, especially in the South, Texas, Florida, here in California, he says that is because more people are being tested. And it is true, more and more people are being tested. But the president said that some of those cases, many of those cases, shouldn't even be considered as cases. Now, a positive test is a positive test. What he is getting at is that he doesn't believe that those cases are significant. He says 99.7% of people, he believes, recover very quickly. What the president isn't acknowledging is the positivity rate, and that is the number of people who are found to be positive, to have the virus, as a percentage of those that are tested. That is also increasing dramatically, and we're seeing the response from hospitals, certainly here in Los Angeles, especially Florida, which we've just been hearing about, that some of those hospitals are seeing many more people coming in, and they are beginning to be overwhelmed.
Peter Bowes. South Africa has now overtaken Peru to become the 5th worst hit country in the coronavirus pandemic. The country has recorded over 350,000 cases, about half of all those confirmed on the entire African continent. Well, joining me now to discuss how the country is dealing with the surge in cases is Pepe Das, chairperson of the South African Cemeteries Association. Mr. Das, tell us, please, how your organisation is dealing with the pandemic.
Right. Look, we don't directly sort of respond to the pandemic in terms of cemeteries. We do not control the cemeteries in the country. What we do is basically capacitate officials around the country to be prepared for any eventuality, and in this particular case, it's the pandemic. We did earlier on, when we went into lockdown in March, on the 26th of March, issue a guideline to municipalities across the country to be prepared and to identify graves in the event we needed to bury large numbers of people that were infected by the virus or that succumbed to the virus, and which has actually happened. The feedback we're receiving as an association is that the metropolitan municipalities that carry the largest numbers of people have prepared, and they've got plans in place in the event that we have to cater, and bury large numbers of bodies that are infected with the virus. Currently, we're not seeing that kind of number and that scare that one anticipated. Our numbers are very low, and the conversation I've had with a counterpart in Gauteng, which in the country is now taking the largest numbers. From what I understand, is the municipal cemeteries are only burying, maybe it's sporadic, 1 or 2 bodies a day, and so the pressure is not on us at this point in time to bury a large number of bodies at any one of our cemeteries. So, and of course, if you look at the actual fatality rate, our numbers are still low compared to what's been experienced elsewhere in the world. So the infections may be increasing rapidly, but the fatality is not as high at this point to bear that much pressure on infrastructure with regards to burials.
We've shown the president declaring the alcohol ban, from saying that he wants to try to save lives with that, to reduce pressure on hospitals, to stop people dying. From the way you analyse what's happening in your industry, has that alcohol ban had any effect?
Look, I think from what we're picking up in the local media is, yes, it has. Hospital personnel have actually commented in the media that they are seeing less in terms of emergencies arising from alcohol abuse, any in terms of assault cases, road accidents, etc., that has reduced. And that's what we are hearing. So there seems to be something positive with regards to that. But I suppose, there has to be some really well-referenced statistics to talk to that. But from appearances, it seems like it's working. But in terms of COVID fatalities and the sort of relationship in terms of infection to fatalities, the numbers that are being released, currently, and the information that we are getting with the bodies that are actually coming through to our cemeteries don't indicate that too many of them are the cause of death to be, COVID-19.
Thank you.
So I think at this point in time, we are still out of the eye of the storm in terms of the fatality.
Very interesting to hear. Pepe Das, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Spain's Catalonia region has again recorded more than 1,000 COVID infections in a single day as residents endure new restrictions. The surge has led to tough new measures being announced on Friday for an initial period of 15 days. People in the regional capital, Barcelona, are being asked to stay indoors, and gatherings of more than 10 people are discouraged. Let's cross over to The Guardian and Observer journalist Stephen Bergen. He's in Barcelona. Stephen, from what I can read, this lockdown is voluntary. Is it a real lockdown then?
No, it's not a real lockdown because the Catalan government doesn't have the authority to do that. The lockdown that we had in Spain was done under the umbrella, if you like, of a state of emergency, which was lifted on June 21st. And for there to be a new lockdown, there would have to be a new state of emergency, which of course could be a regional one. So the regional government is asking people to stay at home, and the other restrictions you mentioned. But I mean, there are two confusing elements to this. One is political, in the Catalan government has, right from the beginning of the pandemic, basically contradicted the Spanish government in a constant sort of show of that we're different, that's because it's a separatist government. And that has undermined, I think, people's faith in their decisions being based entirely on scientific grounds and not just on political grounds. More specifically, these new restrictions on Friday, we were told we should stay home and we shouldn't travel. Meantime, the bars and restaurants are allowed to stay open. Cultural events have not been allowed to stay open. And in fact, the outbreaks that we've seen have not been happening in bars and restaurants. They've been happening in people's homes. So we've, in fact, been told to go back to the places where the outbreaks are actually happening. So, I mean, people immediately see this as illogical, because up to now, rightly or wrongly, whatever the Spanish government has decreed has been quite clear. And as a result, in contrast perhaps to countries such as the UK, people have understood what they should do and what they're not allowed to do, and have basically complied. And now what we see here is people feeling, well, it's not clear what the government's saying, and anyway, they don't have the authority to tell me what to do, so I'll do what I think is sensible. And sorry, if I could just say the other aspect is that these 994 cases you mentioned, it is not clear whether these are we're not comparing like with like, because what's happened is there are a lot more testing. And so as there's a lot more testing, people who are asymptomatic are testing positive. Whereas before, the only people who were tested were people who were symptomatic and had entered into hospitals or got the attention of the medical authorities. So it isn't clear whether we have a new outbreak or whether we're just discovering, as we suspected all along, that a lot of people have the virus, don't have the symptoms.
Stephen Bergen, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
The first Arab space mission to Mars is preparing for liftoff. A robotic craft called Hope will travel to the Red Planet to collect data about its climate and atmosphere. The spacecraft belongs to the UAE. It's part of a plan to help the country move away from oil and gas production to enter the global space industry. The rocket's due to lift off from the remote Japanese island Tanegashima in, a little under 5 hours. The launch has been already postponed twice, but mission leaders are hoping for good weather this time. Our science correspondent Rebecca Morell reports.
Mars is a mysterious planet that has always fascinated people on Earth.
Heading for the Red Planet, the first Arab mission to Mars, the United Arab Emirates about to make history. The spacecraft is called Hope. It was built over 6 years with help from American scientists. Until now, the UAE's only launched satellites to Earth orbit. Getting to Mars is a huge leap.
Feeling more nervous than anything else. We've tested and tested and tested the spacecraft to ensure that it can survive every single scenario. And now all of that rests on a launch pad on top of a rocket that's destined to a planet that's millions of kilometers away from us.
Our view of Mars is about to be transformed. Most spacecraft that have been there have orbited around the planet's poles and very close in. But this has meant a limited view. Hope, though, is a mission with a difference. It's heading towards the equator and in a much wider elliptical orbit. And this means it will reveal almost every part of the planet at every time of day in each 10-day cycle. The spacecraft will study the Martian atmosphere to give us much more information about its weather and climate.
Even though the atmosphere on Mars is around 1,000 times thinner than the atmosphere on Earth, we still see all these weather-type events, so dust storms, clouds, fog, lightning even. So understanding the weather on Mars will help us understand more about the weather on Earth.
Until now, oil and gas have driven the UAE's economy, but it's trying to diversify with its burgeoning space industry. Around half of all missions to Mars have failed, but the stakes are higher for this country.
It's a scientific mission, and failure is an option. However, failure to progress as a nation is not an option. And what matters the most here is the capacity and the capability that the UAE gained out of this mission.
The spacecraft will take 7 months to reach Mars, and if it does succeed, a new player in the global space race will have truly arrived. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Almost 500,000 people have signed a petition calling for a bridge in Alabama to be renamed in memory of the civil rights activist and Congressman John Lewis, who died on Friday at the age of 80. In 1965, peaceful demonstrators led by Mr. Lewis were crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma when they were attacked by state troopers. He was left with a fractured skull, and the incident became known as Bloody Sunday. The petition is one of many tributes that continue to flow for the late congressman from international leaders, celebrities, and former US presidents. Joining me now is the former NBA legend and civil rights activist Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Mr. Abdul-Jabbar, John Lewis's death means that you now may be one of the last of that generation of civil rights activists who came of age in the 1960s. How do you reflect on that?
Well, in some ways it's getting lonely. Sometimes you really can feel the sadness in this loss, but we were very fortunate to be able to have walked the earth with people like John Lewis. So fortunate to have been able to see his example firsthand and understand what he was talking about. And his whole concept of good trouble really is something that has endured and has been an example for civil rights activists ever since he first started talking about it.
How have you practiced good trouble in your own life?
Well, I try to speak out when it's necessary. Most recently, there's been some really crazy statements by some of my fellow citizens about Jewish people that could not be ignored, and I had to say something about it. So I wrote an article about it, and I've gotten some criticism, but I'm glad I spoke out. In a time like this, one marginalized group cannot fail to support any other marginalized group because we're all treated the same way.
In the late 1960s, when you were a young man, did John Lewis influence the decisions that you made?
Well, certainly. I just a couple of years ago, I got a chance to meet Mr. Lewis and shake his hand, and it was such an emotional moment for me. It was one of those things that you say you hope at some time in your life you get to meet someone like him. So his example is gigantic. He will endure as a hero. And what you just mentioned in the lead up to the segment about naming the bridge for him, that would be so appropriate. I hope that's something that happens.
Is America an easier place for you in 2020 than it was, say, in 1970 when you were starting your basketball career?
I think something has changed, certainly. To see the number of people who are not Black Americans supporting the Black Lives Matter movement is extraordinary for me. I never thought I would live to see that. So the fact that now people can understand how systemic racism is such a negative, corrosive force in the lives of people of color, if they can see that and now understand that, maybe we can reach some solutions. So I'm very hopeful in that sense, because it's about time that we got to where we can make the words of the founding fathers a true reality. That is something that all Americans have to contribute to, and we're starting to get it.
Your own league, the NBA, will soon restart without audiences or crowds. What role should NBA players play in the fight against racism?
NBA players have done an incredible job of pointing out issues. We had some crackpot announcer tried to say that athletes should shut up and dribble. And LeBron James, who plays for my old team, the Lakers, he came out and just beat it down as far as showing what an insane and inane statement that was. And his leadership has really been infectious. You know, we have other athletes like Colin Kaepernick who brought up the issue of police violence several years ago and really paid a price for it. But these are athletes. These are not people who are you would expect this to come from. But it's been proven that in surveys that most young people respect athletes number one after their parents. And I think that, a number of different athletes have taken advantage of that and provided a very good and extraordinary example.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, thank you so much for speaking to BBC World.
Nice talking to you. Thank you.
More, of course, on our website, bbc.com/news, and we will be bringing you later that first Arab space mission to Mars. The robotic craft called Hope will be taking off from an island outside Japan. Do stay with us.